Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Glenview's Treasured Tiles. Thank you for sharing your beautiful Sunday afternoon with us. And we're waiting for some more people to come in from the waiting room, and then our curator Laura Vookles will get started.
Is this our fourth program, Sarah Linda?
We
did flowers, we did costumes, we did Pabst. Was there another one, or is that it?
I think that may be it so far.
Right. Well, I was just going to say,
yeah.
Well, I realize everyone can hear we're talking. This is general conversation of interest to everyone.
Chit chat. We're chit chatting while we wait for people to come in.
So this is the fourth time we've
yeah. Oh, okay. Sandy Stern. Thank you, Sandy. We did do the dollhouse, but that was with Darren Scala. That was right. So that yes, that's right.
Definitely the dollhouse is part of it.
Thank you. So it would be interesting to know from our audience how many of these programs you've attended.
That's true. We should do some kind of a little poll. I don't really know how quite
I don't know how to
do that. Maybe Olivia does.
I
don't know if there'd be a way to do the poll like live in the Zoom and on Facebook, or if
there is. I don't know how to do it.
I don't think I have it enabled right now, so I don't think I think I would have had to sign out and come back in to get that enabled.
That might be interesting if anyone that's listening, if you've attended some of the other Glenview programs, it would be interesting for us to know that.
You know, what I'm thinking, Olivia, if you put the email, what is it, programs@hrm.org, and if people would like to let us know which and how many of the programs they've attended about Glenview, that would be really great to know.
Well, because I feel like they're sort of
thanks, Olivia. That what?
I feel like they're sort of building on each other.
Yeah. Oh, Laura, do you see all the lovely comments you're getting?
No, I don't have the chat open.
I think we missed one, but they were all excellent in like capital letters, and they were wonderful.
Well, today's could definitely, the more Victoria and I worked on it, the more I realized it probably could have been more than one talk.
I think
each type of tile. I mean, I was just thinking tiles, and it's a variety of tiles, but each one is such a rich subject that this will be an overview, and
and I do think, Laura, that the wonderful thing that one of the wonderful things I think about these programs is that they're interactive, and it's so often the really excellent questions and comments that are shared by the audience start us thinking about, maybe we should pursue that line of thinking. Maybe we should research this.
Is there anyone else to let in? Should we be getting started? We have 20 people.
Olivia, does that sound about right? We have about 20 people so far?
Yeah, I think we have 31 registrants, but a bunch of them were the same people. So it should be about.
The next talk, you could be saying, or maybe you were going to say it at the end, Sarah Linda, is going to be about the stencils.
That's right. And that's going to be, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the stencils in the restored rooms in Glenview, but there is a long and rich story about that. And we have a very special guest who's going to be joining Laura for that talk. So please stay tuned for that. I guess, Laura, we've got 21 people in here now. It's 1:35. Okay. I think we can get started. Okay.
Sure.
Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone, to our lecture today, a tour, whatever. We call them virtual tours, but I feel like that's somewhat inadequate when we're not in the space. But yeah, virtual tour. And today we're talking about Glenview's treasured tiles. As you can see from this first slide, we have 3 types of tiles in Glenview, and we're going to cover all of them in some something between an overview and a little bit of depth, that we would need 3 separate lectures to really cover them. But we have on the fireplace, we have a tile of Guinevere surrounded by hand-painted flower tiles by Daniel Cottier. Above that, which you will see in more detail later, we have a series of fairy tale tiles by Minton. And we also have a tile floor by Ma and Company. All these people were British, and we will learn a little bit more about them in a minute. Do you want to give us the next slide, Olivia? So this is just some basic information about the program. I am Laura Vookles, chair of the Curatorial Department at the Hudson River Museum. I've been curating Glenview Mansion for over 30 years. I am joined today by our Curatorial Assistant, Victoria McKenna-Ratjen. If there is anyone who could rival my love of all things Victorian and Glenview, that would be Victoria. And Victoria is going to be talking about the Minton fairy tale tiles. We also have here our collections assistant, Yvonne Woodard, who's going to be moderating questions and the program in general. Olivia Cipriano, who I think you already heard talking a moment ago, is our manager of programs and operations and is always here. She is running the slideshow. Sarah Linda Lickblau, who was talking just seconds before, is our assistant director for education. And we plan these programs together because she's in charge of all programs. So then she gets to be my boss when we're working on programs. And then just so you know, when you came in, I believe that your audio and video are off by default, just so we minimize interruptions and background feedback. You can use the chat feature here to type questions and comments for us. So we're going to have comments at the end. And on Facebook, you can use the comments feature also. We'll be looking at both places. Next slide. So I usually just like to start by showing the outside of Glenview. This is one reason while people were coming in from the waiting room, we were saying, how many of the programs have you been to? Because some of it I build upon, but then I also can't assume that everybody's been to every program. So I have a picture on the right of the exterior of Glenview in around 1885. Glenview itself was built by John Bon Trevor, who was a banker on Wall Street. And in Yonkers, that was built houses in Yonkers on the Hudson River. The Trevor family lived there. Emily Trevor, his wife, the daughters, Mary and Emily, and son John, and also Henry Trevor, Mr. Trevor's son by a previous marriage. His first wife had died. And so they lived here overlooking the Hudson River. And then on the left is a picture of Glenview today, which is right across the courtyard from the museum's main building. Next slide. So today we're talking, I already kind of mentioned this, about the tiles in Glenview, and that includes a topic we've touched on in almost every one of these lectures, which is the popularity of British decorative arts in the late 19th century for American home decoration. And it's almost hard to overestimate the degree of that popularity. Americans were interested in all things Victorian, about Victorian England, and the decorative arts was certainly one of them. Next slide. So it just so happens that everything we're talking about today is in Glenview's Great Hall, and here are 2 wonderful pictures to give you a little bit of orientation. You have a long view down the tile floor toward the fireplace, and then looking up above on the staircase, again down to the floor and the fireplace. Next slide. So again, building on things that we've talked about a little bit before, people often call the style that's at Glenview the East Lake style. And what they really mean about that is that there was a author who was also a curator called Charles Locke Eastlake. He wrote a book in 1868 called Hints on Household Taste. And it was meant to guide you to have a tasteful home. It was published in Britain, but it was published starting, I believe, in 1872 in the United States, and it went through a number of printings. And even today, I think you know how much people love whether it's how-to books or how-to TV shows or the decorating channel. It seems like there's just always a thirst for wanting to know how to make your home more beautiful, how to do this on a budget. Actually, Eastlake, one of the reasons he was so popular is he would sometimes mention different budgetary options to achieve the same tasteful result. And so I'm going to be showing you some illustrations from Eastlake in a minute to show you that he actually recommended tile floors and the very company of tile makers that is at Glenview. Next slide, please. But also, and as I have mentioned many times, but also is almost impossible to overstate, the Centennial Exhibition in 1876 was very important to decorative arts in the United States. Similarly to England, when they had a big World's Fair in 1851, there was a sense that they really needed to up their ante in terms of training their decorative artists. They were looking at a lot of the displays that were coming from around the world and thinking that their artists needed to be better trained and that they needed to have a better sense of appropriate interior design. This was also the result of the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. There were machinery and agricultural and other kinds of displays from around the world and around the country, but also art and decorative arts. And it was very influential. And as I've mentioned before, you can almost track all of the interior decorations that were at Glenview to the fair that was going on at the very time Glenview was being built. So from mundane sounding things like the fireplace equipment, we know exactly what display at the Centennial they came from. Last time we talked about Daniel Pabst and how he had won a gold medal at the fair for a sideboard, and the Trevors interior designer hired him to make a sideboard and other woodwork in Glenview. Same for today. Ma and Company and Minton also had prominent displays at the Centennial Exhibition, and lo and behold, their tiles end up in Glenview. So it was an important moment for the country in decorative arts, but also particularly Glenview being built at that exact time ends up being almost a perfect example of that moment when everyone got interested in all these British decorative arts displayed at the Centennial. Next slide, please. So this is just, this is some screenshots from a book about the Centennial Exhibition, a book from the period that I got on Google Books, which I cannot recommend highly enough for people that want to do period research. You can get access to all kinds of old, original materials. So this is the description of Ma and Company, who made the tile floor, saying all the different kinds of things that they do. They have, pavements, majolica tiles, encaustic tiles, hearths, fireplaces, all these different things they make. And then they also want to point out that they have displayed at the 1862 London World's Fair, at Paris in 1867, in Dublin in 1865, Oporto, I'm not even sure where that is, in 1865, and they won medals. And so they're really, wanting to make that clear about themselves. And then here also is a listing of Minton, the fact that Minton Hollands had a display also at the fair. And I believe they won medals too, perhaps. Next slide, please. Oh, that's just that slide again. Sorry about that. Next slide. So at the Smithsonian, which the Smithsonian was founded before the Centennial, well before the Centennial, but one of the buildings, the second building, I believe, that they built had a encaustic tile floor. And this is a photograph actually from 1976, I believe. They had an exhibition about the centennial of the Centennial. And for that exhibition in 1976, they recreated some of the displays from the Centennial to give you a sense of what it was like to go in this World's Fair. I actually years ago saw this display. It's closed now, but you can see this very similar tile floor to what is at Glenview. Next slide, please. And this is just a detail. So you see the way these floors were put together is you have a lot of either just simple geometric tiles, and you plan a pattern and you lay them in this pattern, and then other of the tiles, probably the more expensive tiles, are patterned, and they become all part of the overall pattern. Next slide, please. Again, a detail, just giving you a sense of what these tiles are like. And these tiles are called encaustic tiles, which is actually somewhat of a misnomer and may have to do with how Victorians thought they had been made. Encaustic actually refers to, like, you know, wax and various types of techniques that might involve either wax pigments or lost wax, but that's actually not how these tiles are made at all. They are impressed, almost like those Swedish cookies where you like impress a design on a cookie with these little like cookie presses. You would impress the design in the clay, and then you would have a colored clay and you would sort of fill it in, so that instead of just having a painted glaze on the top of the clay, the color, it has a thickness to it. And I have a slide in a minute that gives you a sense of that. And this is one reason floors like this were highly recommended for halls and other heavily trafficked areas, because it doesn't wear off, or it would really take a lot of damage, not just ordinary wear, for the color to disappear, because it's actually in a depth of the clay. Next slide, please. Now, one thing that's really true in the Victorian period, and even in the long Victorian period, the period like before 1850 and after 1850, is a revival of interest in medieval times, either medieval times in general, and also particularly in England, the medieval era in England. And so really the revival of the use of these types of tiles for floors in England in the 19th century was inspired by medieval tiles and floors that you can see nowadays. One of the easiest ways for me to show you is some fantastic paintings by Jan van Eyck, the Northern Renaissance master. And in these two paintings, one of them from the Louvre and one at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, you see these wonderful tile floors. And this technique had been somewhat forgotten over the centuries. And there was a lot of experimentation in the early 19th century how to perfect it again. Some of the problems they would have is, say, if you pour in the colored clay into the design, what if when you bake it, it doesn't shrink at the same rate as the other tile? Everything just might crack, or it just might fall out or something. So they had to perfect a lot of different techniques before they could get this right. And in the one on the right, also in the Annunciation, it also looks like there are some tiles painted with scenes, which will pertain a little bit to what Victoria is talking about. And I believe I used to be kind of a Renaissance geek before I centered on American art. I believe that all the scenes on those tiles on the floor have religious meaning. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of how enormously popular these tiles were in the 19th century, and the technique had been rediscovered before 1850, but it just became increasingly popular, especially in America after the centennial when they saw the displays, but all around. I mean, I've had scholars talk to me from Scandinavia. There's a lot of buildings in Scandinavia that have these kind of tile floors too. But this is Trinity Church in Manhattan. I just happened to duck in there a couple of years ago. They were undergoing restoration, but all these different kinds of tiles I saw on a floor just in a hallway. And I do not know the maker of these tiles, probably Minton or Ma, I'm not sure. Next slide, please. So this is actually a Minton tile, which I purchased as a study collection on eBay, I believe. And it's damaged, but that's actually one of the things that makes it interesting. Because it's damaged, you can see how the yellow color has a depth to it, that it's actually a whole layer of the yellow color. And so it's going to take a while before it wears out. And if it was further broken, but I am not, as a museum professional, going to intentionally break it more, you would probably see that the blue went down a certain amount, and also the rust color. Next slide. And Minton indeed was a large maker of these tiles. And many years ago, when the museum first started restoring and displaying Glenview as a historic residence, they believed that the tiles might have been made by Minton, just because Minton is more famous today. At the time, in the 19th century, Moyr was a larger operation and very well known. This is the Pennsylvania Academy, which I showed some slides of last time. And when I was there last year, I took this detail of their encaustic tile floor, which is at the bottom of that staircase that you see on the left. And these tiles are attributed to Minton. Next slide, please. And these are some ads for Moyr. I just thought it was interesting to see how, you know, they would advertise themselves. They're imperishable. They have won awards. It says they got an extra medal for beautiful combinations of form and color. And, you know, new hand painted art tiles, they're calling them. So I like to look at things like that. They have a pattern book, which we will actually see an image from in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned a few minutes ago that Charles Locke Eastlake, whose book was read by many, many, many Americans, specifically recommended Moyr for hallways. He talked about how having the tile floors in the hallways had beautiful, you know, design combinations that were very aesthetic, but that were also very durable and practical. So these are two of his illustrations in Hints on Household Taste in beautiful color lithography, showing possible tile floors that you could use. Next slide, please. And this is another detail from Eastlake of some borders. Next slide. Okay, and I meant to have it juxtaposed here, as you're seeing. Last time also, we've talked a little bit about Christopher Dresser, who was very popular he had a book called Principles of Decorative Design that we looked at in conjunction to some of the woodwork patterns in Glenview. That Christopher Dresser, being a British designer of the period, this is 1873, just a couple of years before Glenview. And so I wanted to show it to you, comparing it to these tile borders, to show how these kinds of designs, often floral designs, were used on all different kinds of products. Next slide, please. Now this is another tile floor in Manhattan by Mon Company at the Central Synagogue, again from a similar period. This building was built in 1872. And you just see also how elaborate some of the tiles could be. The ones on the sides going on the edges are a little bit similar to the blue tiles in the Glenview Hall, but then these ones in the center are really elaborate. And this green color is not seen in our main hall, but I'm gonna show you in just a moment, maybe even the next slide, some green tiles in a secret place. Yes, here we go. So this is a behind the scenes tour of Glenview, because this is a room that we don't ordinarily have open, partly because the doors to it are very, very heavy, so heavy that it's safer for them to stay closed. So when you would have come into Glenview from the outdoors and originally, you would have a little tiny entry hall. And there's the Great Hall, which is the giant entry hall. But then, you know, when the butler would come to the door, he's just going to go out into this little vestibule and have the doors to the main house closed and open the door for you, you know, you're familiar with the idea of a little entrance hall. So there's a little entrance hall at Glenview, and usually, unless you're on a private tour with me, I might open it and show it to you. This is the entrance hall. And I one of the things I think is interesting about the tile work that they did in the entrance hall, because it's such a small area, they got some of these more elaborate tiles to put here. Maybe because they didn't have to buy as many of them. I don't know. But so this is the floor, and you see 3 different kinds of tiles going on here, these square tiles. And look how you have to have 4 of them to make up the pattern of this one design. And then you have a border. And then the reason this gets skinny over here is there's one little skinny window. And so that's like a little niche over here by this little skinny window that has its own little tile area. Next slide, please. So this was just a detail of a floor plan, and it's showing you where the vestibule actually is. So you see the Great Hall and the staircase, and then the main doors, and this is where this tiny vestibule is. And over at the, what is sort of the bottom of the way you're looking at it, you see the tiny little window in the vestibule. Next slide, please. So I mentioned I was going to show a design book by Moyr Company so that you could go through it and pick out the tiles that you wanted. So I was really excited. I only actually noticed this last night, that a tile that they have pictured here are the exact tile that we have in that little tiny window area. I mean, the area is only about, I don't know, like 18 inches by 18 inches. And it has these star tiles, and they are just like the tiles that are pictured in the design book. Next slide, please. And here are a couple more of these tiles in more detail. I mentioned the green is seen in the vestibule. The green is not seen in the Great Hall itself. Fairly elaborate tiles. The one on the right, there are only 4 of these tiles in all of Glenview. They are on the corners of the floor in the vestibule. Next slide, please. And just to close up what I was mentioning about the popularity of these tiles is that because of the centennial and the encaustic tiles being seen at the centennial, American manufacturers for sure saw this as a business they should go into, that they could certainly make some money making these tiles over here in the United States. Certainly many parts of the United States that have the right kind of clay, and it's a lot cheaper to make them here than import something as heavy as tiles. But there weren't really being made, or at least not made much in the United States, because Glenview, I said, was being built right then. So our tiles are from England, but the US Encaustic Tile Company was just one of the companies that began operating in the United States, making encaustic tiles. And again, this is a tile that I acquired as part of our study collection about Glenview. So I think I will turn it over to Victoria to talk about the Minton tiles.
Olivia, next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria. I'm the Curatorial Assistant at the Hudson River Museum. Go back one more, Olivia. Back to the title. Yeah, perfect. I'll be giving an overview of the transfer printed tiles under the mantel shelf that were designed for Minton by Moyr Smith. Visitors often ask if this fireplace is a false fireplace, since the Guinevere tile by Cottier is so pristine, but there's actually a chimney above it. The Trevors just didn't need to use it, since Glenview, when it was built, it had all the modern conveniences of its day, which included central heating provided by 2 furnaces downstairs, which is really awesome. Olivia, next slide, please. So I wanted to start this section off by quickly going over what transferware pottery actually is. Transferware was developed in England in the 1750s. It's a process that involves printing a design on tissue paper using an engraved copper or steel plate similar to what's used in printmaking. The pigments used within this process hold up to the firing process of the ceramic. After the print is created, it's pressed ink side down onto the ceramic. And then, sorry, it's pressed ink side down onto the ceramic so that the details are transferred onto the clay. The paper is then either floated off by submerging it in cool water or left on to be burned off during the firing process. Transferring can be done before or after a glaze is put onto the piece, but doing it before glazing in a process called underprinting creates a more durable and detailed final product, similar to etchings. You get really, really fine, beautiful lines, but then you also kind of got artists going a little crazy with it and getting very cluttered, detailed designs in their pieces. Next slide. Thank you. Since only one color of ink, typically blue, black, or brown, was able to be used at once, transfer printing was often supplemented with color by hand or gilding. The green tile on the left is from the Cooper Hewitt, and the green is hand painted, whereas the figure of Apollo is transferred. To cover a ceramic fully in a design, multiple sheets with the printed paper would need to be used at once. Similar to the image from the V&A Museum on the right, you see that after printing multiple little spots, multiple shapes in it. This also allowed for separate areas to be printed in different colors if it was desired, such as the border and a center of a bowl might be able to be printed in separate colors to add more dynamics. Before transfer printing, ceramics were usually hand painted, which is a process that was highly laborious and costly. So transfer printing really enabled a high quality art form that had only really been done by hand on porcelain to be done far more cheaply, allowing for more people to be able to afford them. Next slide. So Minton is the company who we have these tiles from. So the Minton, and Laura mentioned, the Minton factory was founded in 1793 in Stratfordshire, England by Thomas Minton. By the time Glenview was being built and designed in the late 1800s, Mintons was one of the leading design houses for ceramics, and it was known for producing all sorts of items from regular houseware such as plates to the grand tile floors that are now found both in the Houses of Parliament and the US Capitol building. Next slide. In 1839, Herbert Milton, which was Thomas's son, took over the company after his father's death. Herbert expanded the company's production techniques and took the business into new fields, including making tiles. Mintons brought on many established artists and designers to help with their products, including John Moyr Smith, who was a British artist and designer. Smith worked for Mintons designing tiles, including the fairy tale tiles used in Glenview's Great Hall fireplace, many of which were inspired by Brothers Grimm fairy tales. The tile on the right here is one of J. Moyr Smith's, but depicting Hamlet. He also did a whole series on Shakespeare as well. Next slide. J. Moyr Smith designed a set of 12 fairy tale inspired tiles, 8 of which were bought by the Trevors and used in the Great Hall fireplace. The 8 stories at Glenview are Rumpelstiltskin, Cinderella, The 6 Swans, The Brave Little Tailor, Puss in Boots, Bluebeard, Beauty and the Beast, and The Frog Prince. The last 4 from the set are Goldenlocks, Snowdrop, which was essentially like a Snow White story, Jack and the Beanstalk, and Sleeping Beauty. We aren't sure if the Trevors specifically chose the set of 8 displayed in Glenview or if they were randomly chosen. Since the Trevors had young children, they may have been specifically chosen as favorites to use in telling stories to the children. Some of the stories are still quite familiar, such as Beauty and the Beast and the Frog Prince seen here, but others have been nearly forgotten. Next slide. This first tile on the left depicts Puss in Boots, which was recently repopularized with the Shrek movies. It was originally an Italian fairy tale, the oldest publication of which was from around 1550. It follows an anthropomorphic clever cat who uses trickery to ultimately win both riches and the hand of a princess for his master. The tile depicts the cat in his famous boots, presenting a game in a sack, which is most likely rabbit, to the king as a gift from his master in order to endear the king to the man. The tile on the right depicts Cinderella, which is actually a very old folk tale and extremely well-known still. The title is most likely inspired by the 1812 Brothers Grimm version of the story. The title depicts Cinderella running away from the prince at the ball, which in the Grimm tale she does 3 times before the prince follows her. Next slide. So on the left here, you see Bluebeard, which is a French folk tale popularized in 1697. We're starting to get into slightly less well-known stories here. So quick rundown of some of these stories. Bluebeard follows a young woman who was forced to marry a rich nobleman whose wives were all mysteriously vanished. She discovers their bodies in a secret room one day and barely escapes being killed herself. Her family arrives in time to kill Bluebeard, and she inherits his estate. The title depicts her requesting a final moment of prayer before being killed, which gives her time for her family to save her. The story on the right is Rumpelstiltskin, which is an old German folktale published in 1812 by the Brothers Grimm, another Brothers Grimm series. The story focuses on a miller's daughter who is forced to spin straw into gold. She's able to do so with the help of an imp in exchange for her firstborn child. She gets around this deal by guessing the imp's name correctly after eavesdropping on him in the woods. And the title depicts Rumpelstiltskin sewing the straw into gold for her. Next slide. Probably the least familiar to a modern visitor of Glenview are the stories of the 6 Swans, which is on the left, and the Brave Little Tailor, which is on the right. The 6 Swans is another folktale from the Brothers Grimm. The story of it is that a jealous stepmother turned her 6 stepsons into swans, leaving only their sister human. The sister found out she could break the curse by sewing each brother a shirt of nettles and spending 6 years without speaking. After time passes, the sister becomes queen of a neighboring land, and while still mute, but her mother-in-law tries to have her burned at the stake. Just before her execution, the 6 years run out and her brothers fly back, putting on their shirts and becoming human again. She breaks her silence to save herself from her mother-in-law's accusations, and it's a happy ending for everyone but the mother-in-law, like most of these stories. The title depicts the 6 brothers likely being sent away by their father initially to hide them from their stepmother. Their younger sister might be in that basket that he's holding. The Brave Little Tailor is also Brothers Grimm. It's a similar story almost to Puss in Boots, where it's a humble tailor who becomes a wealthy ruler by cleverly completing some tasks. The tale ends with the tailor marrying the princess, but she hears him speaking the truth of his trickery in his sleep. Later, the king comes to arrest him, but he pretends to sleep, and this time knowing that people are listening to him, and boasts about all of his grand achievements. The title might depict the king spying on him while he sleeps. Next slide. So these 2 are also owned by the museum, but they're not original to Glenview. They are not on display with a fireplace. And it's the tiles depicting Jack and the Beanstalk and Goldenlocks. They were bought in 2018 so that we could start completing the set of 12. And they also show a different in color option. So these fairy tale printed tiles were also printed in blue, other than the brown that the ones original to Glenview are. Jack and the Beanstalk is still fairly well known, but was first published in 1734, and many historians actually believe it stems from a folktale that originated millennia ago, which I found very interesting. And probably the most unknown of the fairy tales within all of the whole set is Goldenlocks, which is not to be confused with Goldilocks, which we all know now. The tale focuses on a princess who was called the Fair One with Golden Locks, whose beauty drew a king to offer marriage to her before even meeting her. She turns down his first entourage and proposal, and the king sends his favorite attendant, who is a beautiful and kind man, to convince her to marry him. On his way to convince Goldenlocks to marry him, the attendant helps 3 animals that are in need, each of them promising to pay him back for his kindness. Upon hearing of the king's proposal again, Goldenlocks sends the attendants on 3 impossible tasks. Each of them are then completed with the help of one of the animals he had helped before. Goldenlocks falls in love with his attendant, but it does agree to marry the king. But after some time passes, she speaks so much about how much she loves the attendant that the king locks him away. Goldenlocks then tricks the king into his death and frees the attendant, who is then, they live happily ever after. She makes him king then. So like many of these stories, they're kind of twisted, kind of dark, but also kind of have very interesting morals that might have been used for the Trevor children. Next slide, and I think it goes back to Laura now. Oh, Laura, you're muted.
All right, good. I couldn't resist continuing a little bit Victoria's story of Minton with this next juxtaposition. The last thing we're going to talk about is Daniel Cottier, who lived from 1837 to 1891. One of the reasons I put his dates up here is that it's sad that he had a fairly brief life. He died in his 50s. He suffered from scarlet fever and had a weak heart. He had a heart attack when he was in Florida trying to recuperate. It was, as today, people would go sometimes to warmer climes to try to recuperate their health, but also to show that he was born at the very beginning of the Victorian era, 1837, the year that Victoria came to the throne. But also I was fascinated by the fact that Daniel Cottier, who at the height of his career had businesses on 3 continents, he was from Scotland. He had an establishment in London. He had branched out to 2 places in Australia, I think Sydney and Melbourne. And he also in 1873 opened a shop in New York City. He did all this by the time he was about 36 years old. So it was pretty impressive, I thought. So I put his dates there. So the reason I put this other tile beside the fireplace tile of Guinevere is that this is another Minton tile by J. Moyr Smith of Guinevere. And it just, I had mentioned that, a whole medievalizing aesthetic and romanticism was extremely popular during the Victorian age, during the whole long Victorian age. And so there were, for example, very popular The Idylls of the King by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And a lot of the Arthurian tales came from there. And these legends were practically fairy tales because if they had any basis in actual history, they had been highly romanticized and fictionalized. So Guinevere was very popular, and this is a scene from The Idylls of the King. This particular tile actually came in some more expensive versions with hand painting, and I also got some examples of those for the museum's study collection. So this tile of Guinevere by Daniel Cottier, just to make a little bit more of a comparison between the things that Victoria was talking about. All of those tiles that are the fairy tale tiles that are made by Transferwa were meant, as she said, to imitate hand painting and yet be able to be produced widely so that, they could be reach a wider audience, they could be less expensive, the middle class could acquire them. But tiles like these tiles by Daniel Cottier, as far as I can tell, well, I know they're hand painted, and as far as I've been able to tell from researching Daniel Cottier, they are one of a kind. So it's hand painted, and then it's fired, and then you would basically have to repaint it. You would have to copy your original design by hand to make another one. So I do not think that there is another Guinevere tile by Daniel Cottier. And I'll talk a little bit about the theme of it in a minute, which I find a little bizarre. Could we have the next slide? I just started, I had never really contemplated this passage very deeply until I started working on this talk for you all. And it says, and the queen herself, grateful to Prince Geraint for service done, loved her, and often with her own hands arrayed and decked her as the loveliest next after her own self in all the court. And I thought, what in the world is this quote about? Are they doing some kind of gender bending thing with Prince Geraint? Like, I just didn't know, like, who is her? Who is the her that is being like dressed? And so I looked it up, and it is kind of twisted, but in a different way. Many of these stories do not, as the fairy tales, you know, Victoria was saying, some of them are very dark. Some of them also don't really pass muster in terms of modern sensibilities as far as misogyny and other kinds of things. And so this tale here, when I looked it up from The Idylls of the King by Tennyson, it refers to the fact that Prince Geraint went out on a quest to find a wife, and Guinevere promised that when he brought back his wife, she would do what it says in the quote. I will dress her, I will befriend her. Her name was Enid. He came back with his wife Enid. They got married, and Guinevere did these things, and they were friends. And I think probably because I'm also curating a show with Victoria on women artists right now, this next part really bothers me. So Guinevere supposedly besties with Enid. When the rumors started to go around that Guinevere was sleeping with Lancelot, Geraint was worried that Guinevere would be a bad influence on his wife Enid, so they left the court. So that's the next thing that happened, that Geraint took Enid away from the Round Table and away from Camelot, just in case Enid would decide to fool around with someone else. And they left the court, and they were unhappily ever after, pretty much. So I don't know. Like, I don't have a theory really on why this quote seems appropriate for a great hall, unless the only thing I can think of, and feel free to comment in the comments, that it's more about Guinevere welcoming Enid. So she's saying, I'm going to welcome her. I'm going to treat her as my best friend. I'm going to give her gifts. And so maybe this is why, you know, and who knows if the quote was selected by, you know, Daniel Cottier, or that the Trevors chose it because the quote was on it and they liked it. But I'm thinking that the quote is being interpreted in that way, and not in my 21st century, you know, way of kind of not loving that story too much. Next slide. So I just wanted to, because Daniel Cottier is not an artist that I was very familiar with when I started working at the museum many years ago, and a lot more has been uncovered about him, and his story is being built upon all the time. So I wanted to show you a little bit of the kinds of art he did quickly. There's a book coming out actually by Yale University Press. It's coming out next year. It's written by Petra Chu and Max Donnelly. Petra Chu is a professor emeritus at Seton Hall in New Jersey, and Max Donnelly is one of the curators at the Victoria and Albert Museum in England. And they have been in touch with us to illustrate the Guinevere tile in this book. And so these are two other images by Daniel Cottier. One is Morgan Le Fay, again from the Arthurian legends. This tile was for sale a few years ago by Associated Artists in Connecticut. And I've seen several of these sort of panel tiles made by Daniel Cottier, presumably around the same scale as ours, hand painted, seemingly one of a kind. The other kind of production that was involved with Daniel Cottier's studio was stained glass. And this is a stained glass window that is at the Metropolitan Museum representing spring. And you see, even though it's two very different mediums, you have this very pre-Raphaelite looking female figure, very influenced by a lot of the English painters of the time, you know, Rossetti, Millais, and surrounded by flowers, just like in a very different way, she's surrounded by flowers on the fireplace. Most of the production of the stained glass was carried out in the London manufactory of Cottier. As I said, he was from Scotland, and then he expanded first to London, and then in the same year, actually, to Australia and to New York. Next slide, please. So these are just some details and showing you some other examples of Cottier's work in ceramics. I forget because it's hard to see unless you're looking close. And that's why I took this detail photograph yesterday of Guinevere. She's holding, it looks to me like a falcon. And then you can see also the details of the hand painting in her face, and you can really see the brush strokes. You really get a sense of the fact that it's hand painted. And then these are two platters, one in the Royal Scottish Museum and one in the Victoria and Albert. And I don't know if they're exactly meant to be a pair, but I'm wondering if they might have been, because they're very similar, and one seems to show a woman painter and another one a woman sculptor, which is very interesting to me also. As I said, Victoria and I are right now curating an exhibit of women artists. Next slide, please. And I wanted to, again, get down and close in and show you some of the details on the painted tiles around her. Especially, this very lush fruit and floral border where you can really see how it's hand painted. And even in these floral tiles, even though they're all the same, look closely at the quality of line around them, and you will see that they have been hand painted after a pattern. There must have been a pattern, or maybe like a little pattern was printed on them, but definitely all that color is hand painted. And then you can see how they're attached. You can see sort of the lines between them, and they're screwed in with these square washers. We've never tried to take them out to see if they're also grouted in, or if they're literally just, attached there, held in by these washers. Next slide, please. These are two other examples of panels by Cottier, and I haven't had a chance to research this fully, but I was very interested to see that these are produced by Minton. So Cottier was either, working with Minton, maybe to get them fired and produced. Hopefully when the book comes out about Cottier, we will find out more about these collaborations with companies like Minton, but you can see that these figures are made up of 2 tiles each to get the whole design in. And there are 2 of 4 representing Amour, Mars, Fama, and Fortune. So love, war, fame, and fortune from 1871. And they were from a fireplace in Scotland. And look closely at this piece of furniture at the right, which is also by Daniel Cottier, and you will see those are the same 4 figures. He's reusing his design in those panels on the piece of furniture. And this is a good place, I think, to end, because I was in researching Cottier, and I'm so glad a book is coming out. I was also coming up with only a few examples of his furniture, which is ebonized. And I think, I teased a little bit at the end of the Pabst lecture that research is really ongoing all the time when we get a chance. And this is inspiring some of it, these lectures, on the ebonized woodwork in the library. If you show the next slide, I have a picture of it. Because even though no other makers are mentioned in the newspaper article when Glenview was being built, this ebonized design is not similar to anything that Daniel Pabst ever did. And it's not really similar to all the people. I keep going down rabbit holes with different furniture makers, mostly in the New York, in Philadelphia, and even Cincinnati area in the 19th century. And I keep checking them off as ruled out, that there's one reason or another I don't think it could be them, not to mention the fact that we have no evidence anybody else worked in Glenview. But I did find someone saying that maybe we should be looking at Cottier, because Cottier's business was really an interior decorating business. As early as when he opened it in New York in 1873, he was selling people tiles, stained glass, but also other kinds of furnishings for the home. And he even was an art dealer and would provide you with paintings to be in your house. And here is this ebonized, woodwork with lighter wood decorations on it. And so I don't know. We don't know the answer to this question yet. We're still researching it. And at some point, we will give a lecture on it when we have come to some conclusions. And that is the end of our lecture on tiles, though. And I think we're going to go for some questions.
All right, so.
Hello, Yvonne. This is Yvonne.
Hello. Sorry, this is my first time going through the questions. Doesn't look like we have any comments on Facebook.
Okay.
Someone just said, well, someone didn't just say, but Sarah Linda has linked some programs for everybody for videos that you've missed. And you might find videos also on YouTube. So it's on the HRM website if you look at the bottom of the chat. And then she also linked the YouTube channel. Let's see. Oh, someone just asked a question. Are there any tiles on the upper floors?
Not that we're aware of, but unfortunately the upper floors are greatly changed. Yeah, the second floor, first of all, I always have to defend the museum and for the fact that when the city bought the house, it was only less than 50 years old at a time when the popularity of the Victorian style was pretty much at its nadir. Think of the 1920s. Think of houses by Le Corbusier and the international style and all white cubes and things like that. So they really mostly thought of the building as being a building that they could put a museum in. And some things were removed that were impediments to that. I mean, think about what, at 45 years old, it would be like getting a house from the 1970s and somehow thinking that you needed to make it into a historic house. I mean, you might, but you also very much might not. So I don't, there are no, like fireplaces or any places that you might have seen tiles or in the bathrooms. All of those things are unfortunately not existing anymore. One thing that's interesting about the tiles downstairs, though, is we did find a box of tiles up in the attic, and I believe they were just always there, like extra tiles from making the floor. And so there are mostly the plain ones, and it's interesting because you can look at the back of them and see that they say Ma and Company. So that was a long answer just to say no.
So the next question is, do you know if any company currently manufactures historically based Victorian tiles? And this is from Liz.
Yes, but I don't think the Minton ones does. Mintons is out of business. And at one point the museum had, and I don't know if they still do, reproductions of some of the fairy tale tiles in the gift shop. They might have a couple of different designs still. Olivia, do you know the answer to that question?
Yes, we
Put it in
still
the chat.
currently have some. I know we have Rumpelstiltskin tiles, I think.
Yeah, I think all the favorite fairy tales sold out first. They actually made them for the first time more than 30 years ago. So maybe we'll make them again sometime because they are in the public domain because Minton does not exist anymore. Ma and Company, interestingly enough, reestablished itself. They had been bought by a bunch of different people and went out of business in the 1970s, but then someone reestablished it with the name, just kind of like how there's a Stickley now, even though it's not really the same Stickley that was the arts and craft movement Stickley. They just acquired the rights to the name and make similar furniture. So there is Ma now, and they make encaustic tiles, and there are places you can get reproduction encaustic tiles because we bought some before to have handled, like, to in programs to show kids and people what they're like and stuff. So you can buy them various places. And I would say if you're interested, like in a collecting kind of way and not in a, I need enough of them to do my bathroom, but if you're just interested in them as pieces of art, look on eBay. There's actually a lot of them for sale, and they're not terribly expensive depending on which ones they are.
Okay. And the next question is from Antoinette. Are the Jack and the Beanstalk Goldilocks tiles that were not original to Glenview also part of the fireplace or elsewhere in the house?
No, I got interested in this. Well, I mean, eBay has been, I have to say, I should get like a commission or something from eBay for advertising them. But the internet in general has made it so much easier to research these kinds of things when you're trying to find things that are rather obscure, like original fairy tale books from the 18, whatever, on Google Books. Or if you want to even try to buy things, the internet makes them easier. And I'm losing the train of the thought here. I bought them on eBay is what I was going to say. I had gotten the idea. Someone had asked a question actually of our director about the tiles and wanted to know more about the tiles. And for the first time, it occurred to me, oh, I could just see if I could get some, like on eBay or something. Like, let me see if if any are there, And so I found out, I was able very easily, whereas it wasn't so easy back in the day, if anyone remembers when there wasn't an internet, it wasn't so easy to find out what all the 12 tiles were, or if you could find any on eBay. And there's other sites too. There are other sites. What's the one? There's one that's just for antiques that I go on sometimes. Rose something. Do you know what I'm talking about? Victoria?
Unfortunately, no.
Yeah,
there's Valuable had some when I was researching them.
Yeah, there are other sites for buying things. I'm not just trying to pitch eBay. And often they'll be on all the sites will all list the same vendor's tiles. So I just decided to see if I could find some study collections, because the tiles in the fireplace clearly are staying there. I cannot take them and put them in a case in an exhibit or hand it to you as part of a touch collection to show you, or look at the back of them to see what was on the back of them. So I just thought, I'm going to see if I can assemble a little study collection of tiles. And so when I looked to see what was available, I thought, oh, look, they came in other colors. Well, as long as I'm going to buy one, let me buy one that's not one of the ones that's in the fireplace and that shows that it came in other colors. So sometimes they're very damaged on the back and on the edges, and you can tell that maybe it was like used in some way and then pried out of it because some house was torn down or something. So I think that often they had been in fireplaces, but they might not, but then for whatever reason, they're not anymore and they're for sale. I think that answers the question.
All right, we have a question from Joan on Facebook. She says, thank you, Laura and company. Riveting lecture as usual. I recall you had sold some of the fairy tale tiles in the gift shop. Do you still have them? Also, did the museum ever use bricks from that well-known brick manufacturer in Westchester, or was it Rockland? Thank you again.
Oh, well, I have an interesting tale about the bricks, but I mentioned a minute ago, they made the tiles, the reproduction tiles, so long ago, it was before my time, which is rather unbelievable. So they only have a few left. And from time to time, we talk about whether we might make some more sometime. So, maybe at some point, the gift shop will make more if there's enough demand and a way to get it done that's not too prohibitive. I don't know. I mean, the mansion itself is not made of brick at all, but about 10 years ago, Sarah Linda remembers this, there was a big, huge storm that came up the Hudson, and it was particularly damaging in the park, in Trevor Park. It knocked over a giant tree down the hill from the museum. And one of our docents came up to the museum and said, you should go look in the crater where that tree has fallen down, because there's bricks down in the dirt. And so Sarah Linda and I ran down there. I think we had on dresses that day too, and not pants. And we're scrambling around in this trench where this giant tree has fallen over. And sure enough, there were bricks down intertwined with the roots. And some of them even in a herringbone pattern. And yeah, we have pictures of the adventure Sarah Linda's saying, and we have pictures, and the bricks are in Victoria's office, I think, or and it seems that there was a path, a herringbone brick path, that then over the years, roots of the tree just grew over it and pushed the bricks under the ground. So I don't have off the top of my head. Some of them had a maker on them and some didn't. And I tried to do a little bit of research about it, but since it was 10 years ago, it's not fresh in my mind. But I know that Haverstraw area and the Hudson in general was a huge brick manufacturing center, which is why I was interested to find the bricks. So anyway, more to come, more brick research someday.
Great. I'm just checking Facebook, making sure, Victoria, you answered the question in the chat about where Transferwa was developed.
Yeah, there's an area of the Shropshire area of England, I believe, has very good clay, because I know it said Moyr was originally located somewhere else and they kept having to spend a lot of money shipping the right kind of clay to where they were, and eventually they just moved to Shropshire. Is there anything else? We are around the time we usually end if anybody has any last questions, and I'm sure Sarah Linda wants to come on and tell you a little bit about our next program or next programs.
Laura, thank you so much. Victoria, thank you so much. Yvonne and Olivia, thank you to our team. This was wonderful. And as I think I said at the beginning, these talks, I think, bring up more questions than, even though they do answer a lot of questions, there's always more to research and there's always more information coming out, particularly, online, I know Laura has discovered so much more about Glenview just in noodling around on the internet. So I want to thank you all so much for the program, and I want to thank this wonderful audience for your having been attentive, for your coming, and for your wonderful questions that always spur us on to do more. I can't believe it's going to be September, which it's a little bit in the air today, but we will have 2 more amphitheater shows into September for the first time. We have one on September 12th and one on September 19th. So stay tuned for those. One is a new group that is an electronic South Asian Carnatic music. It's going to be a very interesting program with an electronic violin. And then we have our own Kyra and Friends closing out the season on the 19th with a wonderful program of soul music and music that I think everybody's just going to want to jump up and dance to. So that's our the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall. We will also be open late on Saturday evenings through the 19th, 5 to 7 in the evening, free of charge. However, you do have to make reservations in advance. And on the 12th and the 19th, we will be having, at an extra charge, we will be having yoga in the courtyard. So once those programs are up, I hope you'll take a look and take advantage of it. We also are continuing our art projects on Wednesday afternoons in deference to school being open. The one for the teens is at 5 o'clock, but our art projects and story time for young kids is still at 11:30. And we have 2 virtual planetarium shows every week. 11:30 on Tuesdays for the kids and 7 o'clock on Thursday evenings for everyone. That's the Sky Tonight. And I want to end with our next curator tour from home, which is going to be all about Glenview's stenciled ceilings, as we were mentioning before. If you think the tiles are great, wait till you look up and see the ceilings. Specifically, we are going to be speaking with our guest, Felix Chavez, who worked with the team and with his artists on the restoration of the stencils in 1999. So he has lots to tell. Laura and I were speaking with him and his daughter yesterday and just scratched the surface. He's got some really great, great tales to share. In addition to having worked on, the masterpieces in Glenview, he's worked at the New York Public Library, the Apollo Theater, and the Masonic Temple in New York City, many other places. So we're really excited to bring Felix on next time, and that's going to be Sunday, September 27th at 1:30. So we hope to see you all there, and have a wonderful, wonderful September and back to school in whatever form it is. Stay well, stay healthy. And if you have any questions, again, and if you'd like to share comments, you can always reach us at programs@hrm.org. Anything else, teammates, or are we just about done? Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. Again, thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Take care. Bye-bye.